The most unfortunate thing is any sort of mental health disorder, addiction, depression, anxiety. A lot of these things are very easily treated, but we are just so afraid of admitting weakness that we don't ever ask for help and we don't ever receive treatment.
Enchanted Sky Media.
From the Federal Resources Studio, this is Code 3, the Firefighters podcast, hosted by award-winning journalist Scott Orr. Code 3 features interviews with leading members of the fire service, discussing firefighting strategy, tactics, and other topics you need to know more about. Now, here's Scott.
That's right, and I will not let Parkinson's stop me. Thank you for joining me again here on Code 3. This is the show for and about firefighters. We're informing and entertaining members of the fire service, just like you, from coast to coast. We're going to address suicide on this episode. It may surprise you to learn that PTSD is not the major factor in most firefighter suicides. That's just one of the myths that surrounds and drives discussion on the topic of firefighters taking their own lives. One of the strongest advocates in the fire service fighting those myths actually nearly committed suicide herself 4 years ago. So now she's spreading the truth about firefighters that take their own lives. Dena Ali has been a guest on this show before. She's a 10-year veteran of the Raleigh, North Carolina Fire Department, where she's a captain. She's lectured on the subject at FDIC, and just last month, she graduated from UNC with a degree in public administration. And Dena Ali joins me now. Welcome to Code 3.
Hey, Scott. Thanks for having me back.
You're well known in the fire service for your efforts to combat suicide, but why did you consider yourself at one time?
You know, I think, I guess, and it's, I just watched a webinar last week, and they said, you know, you can never just look at one cause or just identify one cause, because it's never just one cause or one reason. And I guess that was kind of where I was a few years ago. I wasn't in a good working environment at work. I didn't have good, strong relationships where I was, which kind of led to a bit of depression for me. And the situation just made me feel, you know, a little bit humiliated because, you know, my problems weren't, you know, anything that I saw as being significant. You know, I looked outside of me and I was like, man, there are people out there that have real problems, people, you know, who have significant losses in their life, you know, illnesses and whatnot. And here I am, I'm depressed just because of poor working relationship. So that kind of put me in depression, made me feel really ashamed. And I just bottled a lot of it up, kept it to myself because I was too embarrassed to talk about it to anybody. You know, outside of work, people were proud of me and what I was doing. So I didn't want to let on to anybody outside of work that things weren't perfect. And then inside work, constantly trying to prove myself and prove that I belong. So I didn't want to admit that maybe I wasn't fitting in or belonging the way I should. So it just kind of, you know, sent me, you know, in a downward spiral. And I let, you know, depression overtake me and kind of consume my thoughts, which that just, you know, started to lead to thoughts of suicide. And, you know, from what I know now, it makes sense why those thoughts would come up because, you know, if you are in a lot of pain and you are ashamed and you feel trapped, and you feel like it's not getting better, sometimes the thought of suicide might seem like a solution. And I guess in my head at that time, that's what my thought process was, you know, my life wasn't going the way I wanted to. I wasn't happy. I didn't feel like I belonged. So I thought about suicide, and it seemed, you know, like the one solution to make all the pain go away. So that's where I was. Fortunately, it didn't extend beyond those thoughts. And fortunately, at that same time, I got driven to, you know, understand it and study it and research it. And for me, through doing that, I was able to understand why I was thinking that way. And it gave me a passion to try to, you know, figure out solutions and figure out how to keep other people from feeling that way. I was definitely fortunate the timing of everything, I guess you'd say.
So you're saying that studying the problem actually helped you recover from the deep depression that was leading you towards suicide?
Right. It gave me a purpose. As I started studying it, we all have seen the statistics and we see everything that's shared on social media. And, through studying it, I saw that I wasn't the only one. I saw that I wasn't unique, that it was actually a problem, not just in the fire service, but in society. Suicide's the leading cause of death. And for people in their working ages, suicide's in the top 5 leading causes of death. So it's a significant public health problem. So for me to start researching it and then to start seeing connections to things that I read and then things that I could relate to, it just gave me a purpose and it gave me something to put my energy into. And then, as I was working, there was a lot of people before me that had done so much better work than me and have done so much more work. And there were solutions out there and whatnot. So I was able to, understand those. And fortunately for me, I had a good social network and a good support system and people that didn't give up on me and people that were there for me. And I was able to finally open up and express what I was dealing with when I was going through. And I was able to have somebody there for me who could, let me know that, hey, it's okay to feel this way. You just got to open up and talk about it.
We're going to address some misconceptions about firefighters and suicide, and we'll start with an easy one. The myth is that there is a causal link between firefighting and suicide. This surprised me. It's not true.
People make the assumption. They see what's on social media. They see, they might, see certain data, certain things being shared that, we're dying more by suicide in the line of duty. So there's just an automatic assumption that it's a causal link, that this job leads to suicide. But what's important to understand is it's not the job that leads to suicide, because I think we all can agree that through our work, through being, first responders, job is a great protective factor for a lot of people. You've got your crews, you've got that purpose, you're helping people, you're contributing to society. But we do have to understand that there are certain individual factors that are related to the job that can contribute to suicide. For example, sleep. Sleep is a major factor. Poor sleep that can lead to depression. It also, poor sleep, not getting into REM, can also contribute to post-traumatic stress disorder. But there are certain individual factors that might be related to the job that could make you more inclined. But if you don't address those individual factors and you just blatantly say it's the job, you're going to miss your opportunity to solve the problem and to make a difference.
Well, then here's another myth, since you mentioned PTSD. PTSD is the primary contributor to firefighter suicide. Again, in what I'll call the popular media, we've been led to believe this is true, but it's a myth.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're led to believe that it's the case for military. And there was a really good book that I read by Sebastian Younger called Tribe. And he really helped to explain where that myth came from the military. And he helped to demonstrate, the military, they've got high suicide rates, but it's not because of what they've seen. It's generally when they leave the military, when they're no longer a part of the military, when they're no longer a part of that group. I think for us in the fire service, the reason you see it all over social media, if there is a firefighter suicide or whatnot, usually the first thing that's, said about it is, the horrors of the job, the trauma of the job, which, there are horrors that go along with this job. You do see bad things. But in doing so, we're also failing to mention what one of the real issues is. And it's that mask that we put on, that, face that we put on, that, hey, we're the responders. We can't ever be the ones to ask for help. I think a lot of us remember when we first started, there's that old saying, leave your baggage at the door. So what happens, I think, for us is we become first responders, and we believe that we are the ones that should be helping people and that we should never be allowed to ask for help, because if we show weakness or ask for it, then, maybe we're not capable, which is absolutely not true. And, Chief DeGrice with the Chicago Fire Department, they collected data over 15 years for their peer support contacts, and they had almost 3,000 contacts. And the most common complaints for them in order were relationship and marriage issues, followed by organizational problems, not calls that they went to, but actual organizational relationship issues. Then alcohol, legal, financial, and then finally PTSD. That was the sixth issue. So it's not the first problem. And I think, for me, I can relate. When I was, feeling depressed, or when I was going through what I was going through, I felt like my issue wasn't worthy, that, it wasn't a job-related issue. It wasn't PTSD, so I shouldn't be allowed to, mention it. I think that's what happens to a lot of firefighters. They feel like, their issues aren't worthy of opening up about, when in fact, you're human. We're all human, and humans are going to have ups and downs, and it should be okay to share those so that you can address them.
Does it seem to you that for these first two myths that they may be driven by the media in such a way that they're simplified, and you say, oh, he had serious PTSD because of what he saw and that's why he killed himself, instead of looking at the deeper problems?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. I really think the media perpetuates it. And then also just the comments that we make and what we share through our lack of understanding. A lot of people don't have a complete understanding, so they make assumptions. And, the assumptions seem like they might make sense. But until you actually, delve into it and try to understand it, it's hard to make those assumptions, or, you'll realize how inaccurate they really are.
I'll be back with more right after this.
Federal Resources is a mission-critical solutions provider with only one goal: to empower and prepare the first responder for any threat, at home or abroad, that they are called on to respond to. Your mission is to protect and defend. Our mission is to make sure you're equipped with the knowledge and training on response techniques to current threats. We'll make sure you know the latest innovations in technology to ensure mission success every time. You look out for everyone else. Let us look out for you. Learn more at federalresources.com.
Next few myths are not specific to firefighting, but I found them interesting because these are things that you hear again in the public or in media. This myth is suicide is selfish. Is it not selfish?
And that's, I think, one of the hardest ones to discuss. Just this week, I interacted with a survivor, somebody whose husband had died by suicide, and she was still just so very angry, and she hasn't gotten, through that part of the grief. And it's understandable. I mean, you built a relationship and you have a life together and you have a family. They had a child that was in middle school, and, and then he died by suicide. So for her, absolutely, she can't see past it being selfish. And it's almost, I wouldn't even attempt to try to talk her out of that viewpoint. And I think a lot of times that's where that myth comes from. It comes from people who are left behind. How could they do that to me? I can't believe they did that to me. But the unfortunate thing is, the person who dies by suicide, they don't see it that way. They see that they are a burden to others, that their life is, gone off track, and that it is causing pain to not only themselves, but damaging other people around them. Dr. Joyner, he's done so much research and he's done so many studies to try to understand that burdensome component. And he feels 100% that everybody who died by suicide, the overriding theme in their head was that they are a burden. He actually did 2 studies of suicide notes and found that the most common expression was that of burdensomeness. And then he also looked at different mental health disorders and different groups of people, and he found that, one group, the Cleckley psychopaths, this group was almost completely immune to suicide. But unique about this group is that they are described as being selfish to the core. So to find that a group of people who is completely selfish is immune to suicide, and then compare that to what he found about, the overriding theme in somebody's mind before they die by suicide is that they are a burden, and that their death, is worth more than their life, which is absolutely a misperception. But in that person's mind, it seems true. And I always try to compare that to, thinking about maybe an anorexic woman. She thinks that she's, overweight. She thinks that she can't eat because, she's too big. But we look at her and we're like, oh my goodness, she's so underweight. How could you not realize that? But you can't tell her otherwise. But with regards to everything else, she's, everything else is totally rational except for her perception of herself. And that's similar to somebody who is suicidal and in the moments before their death, everybody around them is like, no, you're not a burden. You're not hurting us. We love you. But in their head, they can't shake that feeling, and they can't believe it. It's hard to make them believe that.
I'm going to combine a couple of myths here. Suicide is impulsive, or it's an act of anger.
Yeah, and those definitely, I think, are thoughts that come, after somebody dies or assumptions made. They actually found that anger was not present in most people who were suicidal. The overriding thoughts and overriding feeling was that of sadness. Dr. Joyner, he explained that pretty well, though. He said, if you look at people and, you try to evaluate them, there are lots of angry people. Not all angry people die by suicide. But maybe being an angry person and having that kind of personality might, lead you to have a riskier life or a more aggressive life, which could make you more capable for suicide. But to say that, it's an act of anger is just totally untrue. It's normally the complete opposite. It's an act of sadness, a feeling of failure. And when they really looked into people who died by suicide and looked at their lives in the days, months, and moments before, what they found is a lot of these people, even though they died by suicide, they still went to great lengths to try to ease that pain. The one I was just mentioning earlier, he worked with Raleigh Fire Department. He recently retired, but he actually went to lengths to get the house taken care of, pay off bills, and do everything he could to take care of his family. We learned about Chief Dangerfield from Indian Beach, Florida. And when he died by suicide, he actually left his house, drove a few miles, went off the road because he didn't want any of his family to see him. So they found that it's not an act of anger. It's overriding an act of sadness. And a lot of times people still go to lengths to ease that pain. And then the thought of impulsiveness, and I just read something the other day that was printed by somebody with a PhD, so somebody extremely educated. And it was a great article. Everything in it was, it just really was, it nailed it, except for one part. It said that suicide was impulsive. And that's so just absolutely not true. Maybe the final act could be impulsive. It could be an impulsive final act, but that person has been thinking about it for some time. That person has been building up to it for some time. Being able to die by suicide, it's not easy, and you can't just impulsively make the decision. You really have to overcome that instinct to survive and, overcome the fear of death, because that's our strongest instinct. Our bodies work really hard to keep us alive.
It's true. I have always heard it described as being like a scale. And when your mind gets to the point where you believe that you simply can't recover it, so you may as well just go ahead and wrap it up.
Yeah, and I even, I don't say suicide is an illness, but I compare it a lot of times to, like progressive illnesses like heart attacks, diabetes and whatnot. There's that trajectory that leads a person to that point. And along, like especially for a heart attack, along that trajectory, actions, like changing your diet, exercising, smoke cessation, those things could help prevent, having the heart attack. And then suicide, it similarly travels along that trajectory, except for somebody who, is traveling on that sort of trajectory. It is pain, repeated depressive experiences, just repeated setbacks that make that person feel that death is worth more than life. And, what's the most unfortunate thing is a lot of these things, depression, any sort of mental health disorder, addiction, depression, anxiety, a lot of these things are very easily treated. But we are just so afraid of admitting weakness and admitting that we're feeling this way that we don't ever ask for help and we don't ever receive treatment. And because of that, it continues along the trajectory and gets worse.
All right, Dena Ali, thanks for talking with us today on Code 3.
Thank you for having me.
And we put some more information about the myths behind firefighter suicides on our website at code3podcast.com/myths. Check it out. Look out! Here comes your trivia question. All right, well, actually, yeah, you probably should look out. Looking at an EKG strip, you see that there are 6 large boxes between QRS complexes. So what is the heart rate? I'll have the answer right after this.
If you like Code 3, you'll love the Code 3 Bull Session. It's more discussion with our guests on any topic. Sometimes it's serious. Sometimes it's not so serious. But it's only available to patrons of Code 3. Find out what you've been missing. Go to code3podcast.com/support. Pledge just $10 a month to support Code 3, and you'll get immediate access to all the Bull Sessions in our library and future interviews as we post them. Become a patron today, support the show, and get access to the Code 3 Bull Sessions.
Here's the trivia answer. If there are 6 large boxes between QRS complexes, the heart rate is 50. If you want to calculate the heart rate on an EKG strip, divide 300 by the number of large boxes between the QRS complexes. In this case, 300 divided by 6 is 50, and that's the heart rate. All right, that's it. That's all for another edition of Code 3. If you have any feedback about the show, just email me, scott@code3podcast.com. Thank you for listening. I'll be back next time with more, and I sure hope you're here too. I'm Scott Orr, and until then, stay safe.
Code 3 is made possible through the generous support of Federal Resources. Visit them at federalresources.com. This show is a production of Enchanted Sky Media. To contact us, get more information on today's show, or to subscribe to the podcast, go to code3podcast.com.